My name is Mara Collins, and I'm 40 years old. I never imagined the people I worked so hard to protect, my own family, would one day betray me so deeply. The call came on a quiet evening. My parents' voices were calm, almost casual, as they told me the lake house, the place I thought of as my refuge, my childhood home, had been signed over to my younger brother, Kieran. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the wall, feeling everything inside me go still. Before I take you deeper into this story, let me know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about family betrayal and the courage it takes to fight back. Let's rewind a little. By all outside appearances, my life looked polished, stable, even enviable. I built a career in real estate, one deal at a time, one late night after another. Success didn't come overnight. I started with rental properties, learning how to negotiate with landlords who saw me as too young, too inexperienced, and frankly, too much of a woman in a man's business. I kept going. I studied contracts until 2 a.m. I learned how to read people, their hesitations, their greed, their blind spots. Eventually, I became the kind of woman who walked into a boardroom and didn't flinch. Just last year, I signed one of the biggest contracts of my career, a luxury development on the north side of the city, worth millions. Cameras flashed as I shook hands with investors, my smile steady, my handshake firm. People clapped, my colleagues whispered about my brilliance. For a moment, standing there under the bright lights, I felt unstoppable. And yet, no amount of applause could silence the echo of a wooden floorboard creaking under my bare feet, the scent of pine rising from the old porch of the Clearwell Lake House. That place wasn't just a property to me. It was my anchor. I spent my childhood summers there, swimming until dusk, lying on the dock and watching fireflies blink in the dark. On stormy nights, when the wind howled across the water, I'd curl up in front of the stone fireplace, listening to my mother hum as she mended clothes, listening to my father's low voice as he told Kieran and me old family stories. The house was modest, nothing like the luxury homes I now sold for a living, but to me it was a cathedral. Its walls held my laughter, my first heartbreak, the vows I whispered to myself as a teenager about the life I wanted to build. Every success I've ever had was rooted in that promise that one day I would create stability not only for myself, but for my family too. People often ask what drives me. The truth? I thought if I worked hard enough, if I sacrificed enough, my family would finally see me. Not as the daughter who left home to chase ambition, not as the sister who always put work first, but as someone worthy of love and respect. Every deal I closed, every dollar I earned, was in some way tied back to them. That's why the betrayal cut so deep. They knew how much that house meant to me. It wasn't just a piece of land on Clearwell Lake. It was where my heart lived. The last place on earth where I felt like a daughter, like a sister, like part of something bigger than myself. In the quiet moments after work, when the city lights flickered outside my window, I'd close my eyes and see the lake, still, endless, forgiving. I'd picture myself walking up the gravel path, pushing open the screen door, and feeling that familiar wave of calm wash over me. I thought it would always be there, waiting for me, a place to come home to when the world grew too heavy. But as you'll soon see, even the most sacred places can be stolen, not by strangers, but by the very people you trust the most. I wish I could tell you that my success allowed me to simply live for myself, to enjoy the rewards of years of sacrifice. But the truth is, most of my victories were never really mine. Almost every paycheck, every bonus, every commission I earned found its way back to my family. It started small, the way these things usually do. When Kieran was in college and my parents couldn't cover his tuition, I stepped in. I remember sitting in my tiny apartment at 23, staring at my own stack of bills, knowing I had barely enough to scrape by. Still, I wrote that check. I told myself it was temporary, that once he graduated, things would balance out. But temporary became permanent. By the time I turned 30, I was paying my parents' mortgage. When the roof leaked, I hired the contractors. When their car broke down, I bought a new one. At first, they thanked me. My mother would send little notes saying how grateful they were. My father told me he was proud of how responsible I had become. But gratitude has an expiration date. Eventually, my help wasn't seen as generosity. It was seen as obligation. It wasn't long before the phone calls started coming with an edge of expectation. Your brother needs a little help with his credit card debt. Your father's medical bills came in higher than expected. The furnace went out again. The words were always dressed up as emergencies, but I began to realize emergencies never ended in our family. Flashbacks haunt me sometimes. Nights when I wanted to take a trip with friends but couldn't because I had to wire money home. Relationships I let die because I was always too busy solving someone else's problem. There was even a moment, years ago, when I thought about marriage. A man I cared for deeply asked me to start a life with him. I hesitated. Not because I didn't love him, but because I knew what came with me, my family's endless weight. He wanted a partner. I felt like a caretaker. That relationship slipped away, like so many other chances I let go. I don't think my parents ever stopped to see what I had given up. They never asked about the late nights I spent hunched over contracts, the exhaustion that kept me awake long after the deals were done. To them, I was steady Mara, the one who always had it under control. They could lean on me without ever worrying if I would collapse. The hardest part wasn't the money. It was the silence in return. No one ever said, "How are you doing?" No one asked, "Do you need anything?" It was as if my role had been carved in stone. The provider, the fixer, the dependable one. And once you're cast in that role, no one bothers to imagine you as anything else. Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I had said no earlier. If I had drawn the line and chosen myself. But back then, I still believed love was measured by sacrifice. I thought if I carried enough of the load, one day I'd be seen not just as useful, but as loved. I know many of you watching have felt the same, that if you give more, maybe finally, someone will see your worth. But here's the truth I had to learn the hard way. In some families, no amount of giving will ever be enough. They grow accustomed to your sacrifice the way people grow accustomed to breathing. They stop noticing until the day you decide to take a breath for yourself, and suddenly, you're the selfish one. That realization sat heavy on me for years, and it set the stage for the moment when everything I thought I could still hold on to, the lake house, the one place that carried my heart, was stripped from me without hesitation. When I look back at those years, it wasn't just the money I gave away. It was time, energy, and pieces of myself that I can never get back. Every morning, I'd wake up before sunrise, coffee in hand, scrolling through endless spreadsheets and property listings, while other people in their 30s were traveling, raising families, or simply enjoying their youth. I was calculating mortgage rates and property taxes. I told myself it was worth it because each deal meant stability, not only for me, but for my parents and for Kieran. The invisible burdens piled up in ways no one outside my world could see. On paper, I looked successful. My LinkedIn was polished, my bank account was solid, my professional photos showed a confident woman who had it all together. But the truth lived in the late-night phone calls I could never ignore. I remember one night clearly. I had just returned home from a 12-hour day of negotiations. My heels were still on, my jacket tossed carelessly over a chair, when my phone buzzed. It was my mother. "Mara," she said, her voice trembling just enough to spark panic. "Your father's prescriptions. We can't cover them this month." My chest tightened. I didn't even sit down before opening my laptop and scheduling the transfer. By the time I closed the screen, it was past midnight. My head ached. My body screamed for rest. But I lay awake thinking of all the ways I could push harder tomorrow, just to keep everyone afloat. Those nights became routine. I learned to juggle crises like spinning plates, never letting one drop, even if it meant cutting into my own well-being. At work, my colleagues marveled at my stamina, calling me unshakable. They didn't know that unshakable came from necessity, not choice. There were moments when I allowed myself to imagine what life might feel like without the constant weight. A Saturday morning where I could sleep in. A vacation I didn't have to cancel at the last minute. Maybe even the chance to fall in love without wondering whether my partner could handle the constant drain of my family's needs. But those were fleeting daydreams. Reality always had a way of snapping me back. One time, I thought I'd reached my limit. I had been preparing a massive presentation for a client who could make or break my year. The night before the meeting, my phone rang. Kieran's voice was panicked. He'd racked up gambling debts, again, and the collectors were threatening legal action. My stomach dropped. I wanted to scream, to tell him this was his mess to clean up. Instead, I found myself transferring funds, erasing his problem, and erasing a part of myself in the process. The next morning, I stood in front of my clients with a steady smile, pretending I hadn't spent half the night bailing out my brother's recklessness. People sometimes tell me I'm strong, but strength, when it's constantly exploited, becomes a prison. My strength wasn't a gift, it was a leash. My family knew I'd never let them sink, so they stopped even trying to swim. For years, I believed there would be an end point, that if I could just hold out a little longer, cover one more bill, save one more situation, eventually they would recognize what I had given up for them. I thought love would come as repayment. I thought my sacrifices would finally tip the scales. But love, when tied to obligation, is never love at all. It's dependency dressed up in polite words, and by the time I realized that, I was already too deep, too invested, too entangled. The invisible burdens of my life weren't written in contracts or recorded in ledgers. They lived in my tired bones, my restless nights, the hollow look in my eyes when I caught myself in the mirror. My colleagues saw a woman climbing higher every year. My family saw a safety net. And me? I began to wonder if anyone truly saw me at all. There was a time when I thought sacrifice was noble. I told myself that giving up pieces of my own life was the price of being a good daughter, a good sister. But as the years slipped by, I began to notice how many pieces of myself were missing. I used to dream of living abroad, even if just for a year. Paris was always the fantasy. I wanted to walk along the Seine, sip coffee in a quiet corner cafe, and learn French the way children learn it, by living it, breathing it. I even had the brochures tucked in a drawer. But when the opportunity came, when I was offered a temporary position with an international firm, I turned it down. My father had just retired, Kieran was floundering in yet another failed job, and my mother told me, gently but firmly, "We need you close." So I stayed. I told myself Paris could wait. The truth? Paris never came. And love, real, lasting love, slipped through my fingers more than once. I still remember Daniel. He was kind, patient, the kind of man who held the door without thinking, who looked at me as if I was more than capable. I was cherished. But loving me meant loving the endless weight I carried. He tried, for a while. He came to family dinners, listened politely as my parents praised Kieran's charm while ignoring every success I mentioned. One night, after I'd canceled yet another weekend getaway to bail out a crisis at home, he looked at me with tired eyes. "Mara," he said softly, "you're giving everything to them. What's left for us?" I didn't have an answer. A month later, he walked away. The distance between me and my family should have made things easier. I had my own apartment, my own life. But the truth was, I never really left. Every call tethered me tighter, every request pulled me back. It was as though my achievements existed in one world, and my family lived in another, and I was forever split down the middle, belonging fully to neither. Family gatherings became harder to bear. At Christmas, I'd arrive with carefully wrapped gifts bought with my own money, only to hear my parents gush over Kieran's plans, his charm, his potential. They never spoke of the bills I covered, the roofs I repaired, the prescriptions I paid for. Instead, I was invisible, sitting at the edge of the couch, smiling politely, while my brother basked in the glow of their approval. It's strange, isn't it? How you can sit in a room full of people who share your blood and still feel like a guest. I would drive home from those evenings in silence, gripping the wheel, asking myself if I had imagined the whole thing. Was I crazy to feel unseen? Was it wrong to want acknowledgement? Or was I simply playing a role that had been assigned long ago, the role of the dependable one, the background character in someone else's story? The more I gave, the more they expected. The more they expected, the less they seemed to see me. It was as though my sacrifices erased me. I became a shadow, a resource, a solution, never a daughter, never a sister. I used to think time would fix it, that one day they would look at me across a dinner table and realize what I had given up, how much I had loved them. But time didn't heal this wound. Time only widened the distance, and in that widening gap, my dreams faded like photographs left too long in the sun, once vivid, now barely recognizable. I didn't know it then, but the stage was being set. The resentment I carried, the years of giving without return, the silences and dismissals, they were all threads weaving into a rope that would eventually snap. And when it did, it wasn't just a break. It was the unraveling of everything I thought family was supposed to mean. The older I grew, the more I pulled away from family gatherings. At first, it was subtle. I'd show up late, slip into a chair in the corner, and leave before dessert. I told myself I was too busy, that real estate never gave me time for long dinners or weekend reunions, but the truth was simpler. It hurt too much to sit in those rooms. I remember one Thanksgiving in particular. The table was crowded with cousins, aunts, and neighbors. Laughter filled the room as plates of turkey and stuffing passed from hand to hand. Kieran sat across from me, spinning yet another story about his new business venture. Everyone listened intently, nodding, praising his entrepreneurial spirit. I had closed 2 major contracts that week, deals that would change my company's future. But when I tried to share, my words were brushed aside like crumbs on the tablecloth. "That's nice, Mara," my mother said absently, already leaning toward Kieran again. I smiled and sipped my wine, but inside I felt myself shrinking. I was a ghost at my own family's table. It wasn't just holidays. Birthdays, anniversaries, even casual Sunday dinners left me hollow. I'd sit there listening, waiting for some sign that I mattered. Instead, I became the reliable backdrop, the one who paid the bill at the end of the night, the one who drove everyone home when they had too much to drink. I was always useful, never celebrated. And slowly I began to retreat. Invitations went unanswered. My phone buzzed and I'd stare at the screen, my chest tight, until the call went to voicemail. Sometimes I'd watch the family photos they posted online, smiling faces, arms wrapped around each other. I wasn't in them. Even when I had been there, I was often cropped out, literally standing on the edge of the frame, as if my presence was incidental. At home, the silence grew heavy. My apartment was quiet, decorated with the kind of polished elegance you'd expect from a woman in my profession. But beneath the polished floors and carefully chosen art, there was an emptiness I couldn't shake. Some nights, I'd pour a glass of wine, curl up on the couch, and stare out the window at the city lights. People were out there, building lives, laughing with friends, loving freely. And I sat alone, wondering if maybe this was all I was meant for: success without connection, applause without love. The distance between me and my family wasn't measured in miles. It was measured in unspoken words, in missed calls, in the way my mother's voice grew cooler each year. It was in Kieran's eyes when he looked at me, filled with something I couldn't quite name. Resentment, maybe, or envy, or just the need to keep me small so he could feel bigger. I told myself I didn't care, that I didn't need them, that I was strong enough to stand alone, and in many ways I was. But strength doesn't erase loneliness. Strength doesn't keep you warm on a Friday night when the phone stays silent. Strength doesn't answer the aching question that whispered in my mind, if family isn't the place you belong, then where do you belong? I know many of you watching understand that question. Maybe you've sat in a crowded room and felt invisible. Maybe you've given everything to people who never even noticed. That kind of loneliness is deeper than being alone. It's the loneliness of being unseen by the very people who should know you best. By the time I realized how far I had drifted, the damage was already done. My life had become 2 separate worlds, one where I was admired, respected, and even envied, and another where I was nothing more than a silent provider, a shadow in the corner. And those worlds could never seem to touch. What I didn't know then was that this distance, this aching silence, was only the beginning. The betrayal that was coming would make every holiday slight, every ignored success seem small in comparison. There came a point when the silence between me and my family stretched so wide it felt like an ocean I could never cross. Weeks turned into months, then into years. At one point, I realized I hadn't spoken to my parents in almost 2 years, not a phone call, not even a birthday card. And when the realization struck me, it didn't bring sadness. It brought a kind of numb acceptance, like standing in the middle of winter so long that the cold no longer bites. But the quiet wasn't peace. It was emptiness. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation I wished I had. Words I never said. Questions that hung in the air. Why wasn't I enough? Why did my achievements never measure up? Why did love feel conditional, tied to money or convenience instead of simply being given? Sometimes I'd scroll through old photographs. Me as a little girl, hair tied back in messy braids, standing on the porch of the lake house, beaming with pride because my father had just taught me how to cast a fishing line. My mother, sitting on the dock in her sundress, smiling at Kieran as if the whole world revolved around him. Back then I didn't notice the imbalance. I was just a child, happy to belong. Looking at those pictures now, I saw the truth written in every frame. I had always been standing just to the side, waiting to be chosen. The older I got, the clearer it became. Family for me was never unconditional. It was a transaction. Love, attention, approval. They came only when I was useful, when the bills were paid, when the problems were solved, when the safety net was there. But when I needed them, when my heart was breaking, when I sat in the hospital alone after a surgery, when I faced losses no one else could see, silence. Not a visit, not a call. Just silence. I carried that silence with me everywhere. Into boardrooms, where I stood tall and confident, into networking events, where I smiled and charmed and shook hands, into my own home, where I hung my coats on polished hooks and cooked meals for one. People praised me for being independent, for being unshakable. But independence is lonely when it isn't a choice. It's a sentence. One evening, I found myself sitting on the balcony of my apartment, glass of wine in hand, watching the city lights flicker like fireflies. For a moment, I pretended I was back at the lake house, lying on the dock with the stars overhead, but the memory felt like a cruel trick, a reminder of everything I could never get back. That night, I whispered into the darkness, "I don't have a family anymore." The words felt foreign, yet frighteningly true. People often say blood is thicker than water. I used to believe that. But what I've learned is that blood can be thin as paper when respect and love are missing. Blood without trust is nothing more than a shared surname. And trust, well, in my family, trust had long been broken, even before the final betrayal came crashing down. I know many of you watching this have felt it too, the quiet heartbreak of realizing that the people who should stand by you are the first to walk away. It's a kind of grief that doesn't get acknowledged, because on the outside, nothing has died. But on the inside, you're mourning something just as real, the loss of belonging. By the time the phone finally rang that night, when my parents casually announced that the lake house had been transferred to Kieran, I wasn't shocked by their betrayal. What shocked me was how calm they sounded, how matter-of-fact, as if I had never existed in the story of that house at all. That was the moment everything inside me shifted. Not anger, not tears, just a heavy, devastating clarity. I had never been their choice. The irony is that the biggest triumph of my career came just days before everything fell apart. I had been chasing a development project for nearly 2 years, a sprawling complex on the north side of the city, the kind of deal that changes everything. Investors came and went, negotiations stalled, permits hit red tape. Any other agent would have walked away, but I didn't. I pushed, I strategized, I learned the language of city officials and financiers alike. And finally, on a crisp Tuesday morning, the deal closed. The signing ceremony felt surreal. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes, and the mayor himself shook my hand. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel, pride that belonged only to me. No one could take this moment away. It was mine. As I stood there under the lights, I thought about that little girl sitting by the lake, making promises to herself about the life she would one day build. She would have been proud. For a fleeting moment, I felt like I had finally kept my word to her. That evening, I returned home, still buzzing with adrenaline. I poured a glass of champagne, sat by the window and looked out at the skyline glittering against the night. The city was mine, I thought. And maybe, just maybe, this success would finally bridge the gap with my family. I told myself they would have to notice now. That my father, an accountant who always measured life in numbers, would understand the magnitude of what I had accomplished. That my mother, who prided herself on appearances, would beam with pride at seeing her daughter's name in the paper. That Kieran, for once, would look at me not with envy, but with respect. Hope can be a dangerous thing. Fueled by that fragile hope, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I called my parents. My mother picked up, her tone polite but distant, as if she were speaking to a neighbor rather than her daughter. Still, I told her the news. I told her about the contracts, the mayor, the cameras. There was a pause, then a simple, "That's nice, Mara, we're glad you're doing well." That was it. No excitement, no congratulations, just a line of small talk before she changed the subject to Kieran's upcoming engagement party. I sat there, phone in hand, staring into the silence after she hung up. Part of me wanted to throw the glass against the wall. Instead, I laughed, a short, bitter laugh at my own foolishness. How many times would I keep hoping they would see me? How many times would I hand them my heart, only to watch them set it aside? But even as the sting burned, I made one more choice. My mother mentioned they were hosting a small gathering that weekend, a dinner to celebrate her birthday. Against every instinct, I told her I would come. I told myself it was a chance, one last chance, to stand in that room and be recognized. To share my success face to face and maybe finally hear the words I'd been waiting for all my life. I didn't know it then, but walking into that weekend would change everything. The success I thought might heal the wound would only make the betrayal that followed cut even deeper. The night before my mother's birthday dinner, I stood in front of my closet, pulling out dresses I hadn't worn in years. It felt strange, like preparing for a date you weren't sure would show up. I held a simple navy dress against me in the mirror, the kind of dress that said professional but approachable. For a moment, I let myself imagine walking into that room, seeing my parents' eyes light up, hearing them brag about me the way they always bragged about Kieran. I wanted so badly to believe this time would be different. The next morning, as I packed a small overnight bag, my phone rang. It was my father. Relief flooded me. Finally, a sign they were reaching out. I answered with a smile in my voice, but his tone was flat, businesslike. "Mara," he said, "about tomorrow night." He cleared his throat. "We think it would be best if you didn't come." At first, I thought I'd misheard. "Didn't come?" I repeated, laughing nervously. "Dad, it's Mom's birthday." There was a pause. Then my mother's voice came on the line, clipped and cool. "It's not the right time, Mara. Kieran and his fiancée will be there, and we don't want any tension." My chest tightened. "Tension?" I asked. "I just wanted to celebrate with you, to be with my family." Her reply was a dagger, delivered without hesitation. "Mara, sometimes it's better if strangers stay strangers. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." The room around me blurred. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "Strangers?" I whispered. "Yes," she said simply. "We've made our decision. Don't come." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I heard my father's sigh, the shuffle of movement on their end of the line, and then silence. The call had ended. I stood there, phone pressed against my ear even after the screen went dark, as if keeping it there might bring their voices back, might change what they'd just said. But nothing came. Just the hum of the city outside my window, and the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed. My mind replayed every word, each syllable burning itself into my memory. Strangers, not welcome, don't come. The pain was sharp, almost physical. I felt it in my chest, in the pit of my stomach, in the trembling of my hands. All those years of sacrifice, all those checks written, all those dreams set aside. And this was my reward. I didn't cry. The tears wouldn't come. Instead, a hollow numbness settled over me, heavier than any grief I had ever known. It was as if something inside me had broken, not with a crash, but with a quiet snap. I know some of you watching understand that moment, the moment when hope dies, not with fireworks, but with a phone call, when the people you thought would always be your home slam the door and call you an outsider. That night, I sat in the dark with the navy dress still draped across the bed, untouched. My champagne glass from the week before still sat on the windowsill, half empty, a reminder of the hope I had carried so foolishly. For the first time in my life, I truly understood. I was not their daughter in the way I had always believed. To them, I was useful when needed, disposable when not. And in that silence, a seed of something new began to form. Not forgiveness, not yet anger, but resolve, the kind that only comes when you realize you have nothing left to lose. I should have hung up that night and left it there. But something inside me, maybe that last flicker of the little girl who still wanted to be chosen, forced me to call back. The phone rang twice before my father answered. His voice was clipped, impatient. "Mara, I thought we made this clear." I swallowed hard. "Dad, please, I just don't understand. I've given everything for this family. I've been there through every crisis, every bill, every—" He cut me off. "Enough, Mara. You don't get to use that as leverage. We didn't ask you to do all those things." His words stung. Didn't ask? They might never have spoken the request, but their silence had always been an answer. I steadied my voice, trying one more time. "I just want to be there, for Mom, for all of you." That's when my mother came on the line again, and this time her voice carried no hesitation, no softness at all. "Mara, if you insist on coming tomorrow, don't bother calling us your parents anymore. We won't have you ruin this family with your bitterness." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the nightstand just to stay upright. "You're saying, if I show up, I'm no longer your daughter?" Yes, she said simply. That's exactly what we're saying. And then the line went dead. For a moment I stood there frozen, the silence pressing down like a weight I couldn't escape. My own parents had just disowned me with the ease of swatting away an annoying fly. The people I had sacrificed decades for, people I had bled for in ways they'd never even noticed, had reduced me to nothing in a single sentence. I sat down on the floor, the phone still clutched in my hand. The city outside carried on as if nothing had happened, cars honking, laughter drifting from a nearby bar, the hum of life unbroken. But inside me, something had cracked wide open. It's strange how betrayal can feel both shocking and inevitable. Part of me had always feared this moment, had known deep down that my love was conditional in their eyes. But hearing it spoken aloud, hearing my own mother say she would no longer call me her daughter, was like being cut with a blade I never saw coming. I didn't cry, not that night. Instead, I felt a chilling calm settle over me like ice filling my veins. If they could discard me so easily, then maybe I had been a stranger all along. Maybe the family I thought I had never truly existed, except in my imagination. I know some of you watching understand that kind of devastation, the kind where you don't even have the energy to scream or fight back, where all you can do is sit in the quiet, your whole body numb, while the truth seeps into every corner of your being. That night, I didn't change out of my clothes. I didn't turn off the light. I just sat there staring at nothing, replaying those words again and again. Don't bother calling us your parents anymore. The words etched themselves into me, sharp and permanent. And with them came a clarity I hadn't had before. The family I had carried on my back for decades had never been mine to begin with. They took, they demanded, they expected, but love? Real, unconditional love? That had never been part of the bargain. As the sun began to rise, I felt something inside me harden. I wasn't ready to fight yet, but I was no longer willing to beg. They had disowned me with their words. Now it was my turn to decide what I would do with the life they had left behind. By the time the sun had fully risen, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't a decision made in anger. It wasn't even revenge. It was survival. I walked into my home office, still wearing yesterday's clothes, and opened my laptop. For years, I had set up automatic transfers. Thousands of dollars leaving my account every month, slipping quietly into my parents' mortgage payments, medical bills, and Kieran's endless emergencies. My entire adult life was cataloged in those line items, proof of every sacrifice I had made. One by one, I began shutting them down. Cancel transfer, end automatic payment, remove recurring bill. The screen kept flashing confirmations, little green check marks as if to say, yes, you're free. With every click, I felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because I was finally breaking the chain. Heavier because each cancellation felt like a funeral. I wasn't just ending payments. I was burying decades of loyalty. I paused when I reached Kieran's account. My brother, who I had bailed out more times than I could count. The overdraft fees, the gambling debts, the luxury purchases disguised as necessities. I hovered over the keyboard for a long time. Some part of me still wanted to protect him, still wanted to believe that maybe if I saved him one more time, he'd finally see me as more than just his safety net. But then my mother's voice echoed in my head. If you insist on coming, don't bother calling us your parents anymore. The words were ice. I clicked cancel. When the last transfer disappeared from the screen, I leaned back in my chair and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding. But for the first time in years, I felt a spark of power in my chest. That afternoon, my phone lit up with messages. First, from my mother. Mara, the mortgage payment didn't go through. Is there a problem? Then my father. We need to talk. The hospital won't release your father's medication without the payment. Then Kieran. Seriously? You just cut me off? What the hell is wrong with you? I didn't respond, not a word. I set the phone face down on the table and poured myself a glass of water. The silence that followed was deafening, but it wasn't the old emptiness. It was new. It was deliberate. Hours later, another call came through. This time, I let it ring out, then listened to the voicemail. My father's voice tight with anger. Mara, you've made your point. But if you think you can punish us like this, you're mistaken. Family isn't something you walk away from. I almost laughed at the hypocrisy. Family, in his definition, was something I had never truly been a part of, unless my bank account was involved. That night, I sat in the same spot where I had heard their rejection, only this time the silence felt different. It wasn't numbness, it wasn't grief. It was the quiet strength that comes when you finally stop begging for a seat at a table that was never meant for you. I didn't celebrate, I didn't cheer. I simply sat there, letting the reality wash over me. I was free. Free of the financial leash, free of the endless demands, free of the illusion that sacrifice would one day equal love. But freedom, I was beginning to learn, is not without cost. As I stared at the dark screen of my phone, I knew this was only the beginning. They would not let go of me easily. And the war that was coming would be unlike anything I had faced before. That night, after cutting every financial tie, I lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. The silence felt different now. It wasn't the hollow emptiness I had known for years. It was heavier, sharper, alive with 1,000 thoughts racing through me. Part of me was furious. Furious at the years I had wasted, at the opportunities I had let slip away, at the way my parents and brother had shaped me into someone who believed love had to be earned through sacrifice. I clenched my fists under the covers, replaying every phone call where my needs were brushed aside, every holiday dinner where I disappeared into the background, every time Kieran's failures were dressed up as potential while my victories were treated like inconveniences. But alongside the fury was something else, something I hadn't felt in decades. Relief. It startled me at first. How could I feel lighter after something so devastating? How could I feel even a hint of peace after my parents had essentially disowned me? Yet, as I lay there in the dark, I realized what it was. For the first time in my adult life, no one could demand anything of me. No one could pull me back with a phone call. No one could drain my account with a new emergency. I had finally taken my hands off the rope that had been burning my skin for years. The next morning, I poured a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the city wake up. For once, I didn't check my phone first thing. I didn't rush to see what crisis awaited me. Instead, I sat in stillness, letting the warmth of the mug seep into my hands. It felt foreign, almost indulgent, to start a day without the weight of someone else's problems pressing on me. Of course, the calls kept coming. My voicemail filled with angry words, desperate pleas, shifting tones from outrage to guilt to manipulation. "How could you do this to us?" "We're family, Mara. Don't forget that. You're selfish. You've changed." Each message was another attempt to reel me back in. I listened to them once, then deleted them, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. For years, I had let those voices dictate my life. Now, I chose silence. But I won't pretend it was easy. There were moments when the guilt crept in, whispering that I had abandoned them, that maybe I really was selfish. Nights when I sat on the couch, scrolling through old photos, my eyes stinging with tears I had refused to shed. I would see my father holding my hand at the lake house, my mother brushing my hair, Kieran chasing fireflies across the lawn. Were those memories lies? Or had they simply stopped loving me somewhere along the way? That question haunted me, and yet beneath the pain there was that steady pulse of freedom. I know many of you watching understand that contradiction. The way freedom can taste both sweet and bitter. How cutting ties with toxic family members feels like severing a limb. You mourn the loss, but you also realize the limb had been poisoned all along. As the days passed, I began to sense something shifting inside me. The anger was still there, raw and sharp, but it no longer consumed me. The sadness lingered, heavy as stone, but it no longer defined me. What grew in their place was something quieter, steadier, a kind of strength I had never known before, the strength of choosing myself. I didn't know what the future would look like. I didn't know how much harder the fight would get. But I knew this much. I had survived their rejection, their cruelty, and the weight of their expectations, and for the first time, I felt the faintest spark of possibility. I wasn't free yet, but I was no longer a prisoner, and that, I realized, was the beginning of everything. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. The first sign came just 3 days after I shut down the transfers. I was in the middle of a client meeting when my phone buzzed over and over, vibrating across the table until I finally silenced it. By the time I walked out, there were 12 missed calls, 6 from my mother, 4 from my father, and 2 from Kieran. The voicemails told the story. My mother's voice, sharp with panic. Mara, the utility company says we're overdue. They're threatening to shut off service. You need to fix this. My father's weary but tinged with accusation. I don't know what you're trying to prove, Mara, but your mother can't sleep with all this stress. Call us back. And then Kieran, his words laced with fury. What kind of sister does this? You know I've got a wedding coming up. You're ruining everything. I sat in my office, phone in hand, listening to each message until the screen went dark. My heart pounded, but not with guilt. Not this time. It was something closer to recognition. For the first time, I could see the pattern clearly. Their lives had been built on the assumption that I would always clean up the mess. Without me, the entire structure was starting to wobble. Later that week, the calls escalated. My parents' internet was shut off. A florist canceled Kieran's wedding order because payments hadn't gone through. My mother's voice on the voicemail cracked as she tried to sound composed. Mara, please. These things are embarrassing. People are starting to ask questions. Embarrassing. Not painful, not difficult. Embarrassing. I poured a glass of wine that night and sat by the window, listening to the messages on speakerphone. My father's voice grew more desperate. You've made your point, but this isn't sustainable. We need you. Your mother needs her medication. The bills are stacking up. Just come home, Mara. Let's talk about this. Kieran's messages, meanwhile, grew uglier. You think you're better than us? You think just because you make money you can play God? Well, guess what? This family doesn't need you. You'll regret this. His rage was almost comical in its transparency. He wasn't angry about family ties. He was angry that the golden faucet had been turned off. The strangest part was the calm I felt as I listened. For years, those kinds of messages would have sent me spiraling, running to fix things before they fell apart. But now, I simply let them play out like a radio drama, each one a reminder that the power dynamic had shifted. Still, there was a sting I couldn't ignore. Not once did they say, "We miss you." Not once did they say, "We love you." Every word was about bills, obligations, appearances. The silence around my worth as a daughter was louder than their shouting. I know many of you watching have been there, the moment when the mask slips, and you realize that what you thought was love was dependency all along. It's a brutal revelation, but also a freeing one, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. One evening, after another flood of calls, I walked out to the balcony and let the night air wash over me. The city lights sparkled below, and I thought about the lake house. I wondered if my parents and Kieran were sitting there, candles lit because the power had been cut, cursing my name while still depending on me to fix everything. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house I had loved all my life, the place that held my childhood joy, had become the stage for their unraveling. And though it hurt, a part of me felt vindicated. They were finally experiencing life without me as their safety net. But I also knew this was only the beginning. Desperation has a way of twisting people, of making them say things they never thought they'd say, of pushing them to claw back what they think belongs to them. And deep down, I sensed the storm was still gathering. The tone of the messages shifted quickly. At first they were frantic, begging. Then they turned sharp, like knives thrown in my direction. My phone lit up one morning with a dozen new texts from my mother. I opened them slowly, already bracing myself. Mara, how could you do this to us, after everything we've given you? Do you know how humiliating this is? People are talking. And finally, the dagger. I should never have trusted you with anything. You've always been cold. I stared at the words on the screen, letting them burn. Always been cold. It amazed me how easily she rewrote history, how quickly decades of sacrifice could be erased with a single accusation. My father wasn't far behind. His voicemail carried the same rhythm he used when scolding me as a teenager. You've made a fool of us, Mara. This isn't how a daughter behaves. You think money gives you the right to abandon your family? You should be ashamed. Ashamed. That word had been his weapon for as long as I could remember. Ashamed for speaking up. Ashamed for wanting more. Ashamed for daring to exist outside the lines they had drawn for me. But the truth was, for the first time, I didn't feel ashamed at all. Kieran, of course, was the loudest. His voice exploded through my phone like a storm. You've ruined everything. The wedding's falling apart because of you. The vendors are pulling out, Mom and Dad are a wreck, and it's your fault. You've always been jealous of me, Mara. Admit it. You couldn't stand to see me happy, so you took it all away. I actually laughed when I heard that one. Jealous? I had given up half my life to ensure his comfort, and still, In his mind, I was the villain. His rage only revealed the truth. Without me, his carefully constructed world collapsed. And yet, through all of it, I stayed silent. I didn't return their calls. I didn't defend myself in long paragraphs of explanation. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to. Silence, I discovered, can be louder than any words. Each day, as the messages piled higher, I felt my own strength growing. I played them on speaker while I cooked dinner, their voices rising in anger while I chopped onions or stirred pasta sauce. I let their fury wash over me like static on the radio, background noise that no longer dictated my actions. But I won't lie to you. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the accusations replayed in my head, whispering that maybe they were right, maybe I was cruel. That old guilt crept in, heavy and familiar. I would pace my apartment, wondering if I had finally gone too far. And then, like clockwork, I'd remember the sound of my mother's voice. "Don't bother calling us your parents anymore." I'd remember the cold dismissal, the effortless rejection. And the guilt would evaporate, because here was the truth. My silence wasn't punishment. It was protection. It was the boundary I should have drawn years ago. And though they hated it, though they called it cruelty, deep down I knew it was the only way I could survive. I know many of you watching understand this. That moment when the people you've given everything to turn on you, twist the story until you're the villain. It hurts. It cuts deep. But once you see the game, once you realize their words are only weapons to pull you back, you start to hear them differently. You stop bleeding every time they strike. By the end of that week, my voicemail was full, my text inbox overflowing with anger and blame. I deleted them all with a single swipe. My phone screen went dark, and for the first time in days, my apartment felt quiet again. And in that quiet, I felt something powerful take root. They could rage, they could accuse, they could try to twist me into the villain, but I no longer belonged to their story. Life has a way of flipping the script when you least expect it. A few weeks after I cut off the payments, I was walking into a meeting with a new client, a mid-sized construction firm hoping to expand into commercial properties. The receptionist greeted me warmly, and as I stepped into the conference room, I froze. Sitting at the far end of the table, shifting nervously in his chair, was Kieran. For a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. My brother, the golden child, the one who had been shielded and praised while I carried the weight, was now an employee at the very firm seeking my approval. He looked different. The confidence he used to wear like armor was gone. His suit was wrinkled, his smile tight and forced. The room went still when our eyes met. I could see the flash of recognition, then panic in his face. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. The irony was almost too sharp to believe. For years he had treated me like a shadow, someone to take advantage of but never respect. And now here he was, sitting across from me, powerless to change the fact that I held the leverage. I took my seat calmly, greeting the other executives with a steady hand. My voice didn't waver. I discussed terms, outlined strategies, laid out expectations. I didn't look at Kieran often, but when I did, his face told me everything. He knew. He knew the balance of power had shifted, and nothing he could say would undo it. After the meeting ended, the executives filed out, leaving just the two of us in the room. The silence between us was heavy, years of resentment packed into the space. Finally, Kieran spoke. His voice was lower than I remembered, stripped of arrogance. "Mara, I didn't know you were involved in this deal." I raised an eyebrow. "That seems to happen a lot, doesn't it? You never quite know what I'm capable of until it's too late." He swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the door like he wanted to escape. "Look, about everything that's happened, Mom and Dad, they've been under a lot of stress. They didn't mean—" I cut him off with a quiet laugh. "Don't rewrite the story, Kieran. They meant every word. And so did you." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. For once, he had no comeback, no excuse, just silence. I stood to leave, gathering my papers. "Here's the thing, Kieran," I said, pausing at the door. "I don't need your apology, not anymore. I see you clearly now, and maybe that's worse for you than it is for me." His shoulders slumped. In that moment, he wasn't the favored son or the chosen one. He was just a man sitting in the shadow of the sister he'd spent his life underestimating. Walking out of that building, I felt a rush of conflicting emotions, vindication, sadness, a strange, quiet triumph. For years I had wondered if I would ever be seen, if my worth would ever be undeniable. And now, the very brother who had dismissed me was forced to face a truth he couldn't escape. I didn't need him. He needed me. I know many of you watching understand how powerful that moment can be. When the tables turn, when the person who once belittled you has no choice but to look up instead of down, it doesn't erase the pain, it doesn't undo the years of being overlooked, but it does something else. It restores a piece of your dignity. As I stepped into the sunlight, I realized this was the beginning of a new chapter. I no longer had to beg for respect. I no longer had to fight to be acknowledged. Life itself had handed me the evidence of who I was and who they had chosen to be. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt like the one holding the truth. Not long after that meeting with Kieran, word began to spread. In business circles, deals don't stay quiet for long. My name was on contracts, in press releases, even in local papers. People who once only knew me as the Collins daughter started to speak of me as Mara Collins, the woman who had built an empire from nothing. And with that recognition came whispers. Questions started finding their way back to my parents. At church, at the grocery store, even among their friends at the lake. "Isn't that your daughter in the paper? She must be doing well." I didn't realize she was the one behind Northlake Holdings. That company's making headlines. For years, my parents had downplayed me, painting me as the distant daughter too busy for family. Now, the story was unraveling in front of them. They couldn't hide it anymore. People were beginning to see the truth. That the very daughter they had pushed aside, disowned, and labeled a stranger was the one holding the kind of power and respect they had always craved. The breaking point came at a community dinner held near the lake. It was one of those events where everyone knew everyone, where appearances mattered more than anything. My parents were there, of course, seated at a long table with neighbors they'd known for decades. Kieran and his fiancée sat beside them, trying to look unbothered. I hadn't planned on attending, but fate has a way of drawing you into the very rooms you once avoided. A colleague had invited me as a guest, unaware of the family drama. When I walked in, conversations paused, heads turned. My name rippled through the room in hushed tones. I could feel my mother's eyes on me, wide with shock, my father's jaw tightening as if he'd seen a ghost. I smiled politely, shaking hands with old neighbors who congratulated me warmly. "We're so proud of you, Mara," one of them said loudly, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Your parents must be over the moon." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents forced weak smiles, their discomfort impossible to hide. Kieran shifted in his chair, his fiancée whispering something to him. Finally, he muttered, "She just got lucky. Right place, right time." His words were bitter, brittle, cracking under the weight of truth. I didn't need to respond. The room did it for me. One of the older men at the table shook his head. "Luck? No, son. That kind of success doesn't come from luck. Your sister earned it." The air grew thick. My parents fumbled for words, trying to steer the conversation away, but the damage was done. Their version of the story, the one where I was disposable, insignificant, had collapsed in front of an entire community. I excused myself before dessert, slipping out into the cool evening air. As I walked toward my car, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Vindication, yes. A deep satisfaction in knowing the truth was finally visible, but also sadness, because it hadn't come from their mouths. It had come from strangers who could see what my own family never would. Still, there was power in that moment. For once, I didn't feel the need to prove myself. I didn't have to shout or beg or explain. Life itself had revealed the truth, and the people who had tried to erase me were left standing in their own silence. I know many of you watching understand this feeling. That moment when you no longer need an apology to be validated. When the truth shines so brightly that even those who denied it can't hide anymore. It doesn't erase the years of pain, but it does heal something deep inside. Driving away from that dinner, I realized I no longer needed their recognition. I had it where it mattered most, in myself, and in the undeniable reality of what I had built. They could keep their silence. They could cling to their denial. But the world now knew. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. After that night at the community dinner, something in me shifted. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to fight for recognition. The truth had already spoken louder than I ever could. But when the applause faded and the congratulations quieted, I was left with something harder to face. My own emptiness. The lake house still lingered in my mind. It was the place I had loved most and lost most. For weeks, I avoided even driving near Clearwell Lake, afraid of what it would do to me. But healing requires facing what hurts. So one Saturday, I drove out there alone. The gravel road crunched beneath my tires as the trees gave way to the view I knew by heart. The house stood just as I remembered, weathered wood, shutters that creaked in the wind, the dock stretching into still water. But it felt different now. It didn't belong to me anymore, not on paper and not in spirit. I sat in the car for a long time before finally stepping out. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, a scent that carried me back to summers as a child, chasing fireflies until my mother called us in. My chest tightened, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. This was the place where I had first learned joy. Now it was also the place where I had learned betrayal. I walked down to the dock, the boards groaning beneath my feet. Sitting at the edge, I let my shoes dangle above the water, staring at my reflection in the rippling surface. I thought of the girl I had been, the promises I had whispered into the wind, that I would make something of myself, that I would honor my family, that one day I would return here with pride. I whispered an apology to her. Not because I had failed, but because I had carried her dream for too long, even when it had turned into a weight. I kept my promise, I said quietly, but it's time to let it go. The tears came then, not in a flood, but in steady drops, like the rain beginning to fall on the lake's surface. For the first time, I let myself grieve. Not just the loss of the house, but the loss of the family I thought I had, the years I had given away, the love that had never truly been returned. Grief is heavy, but it's also cleansing. By the time I stood to leave, I felt lighter, as if I had laid something down on that dock that I no longer needed to carry. Healing doesn't come all at once. It comes in small, quiet choices, like walking away from the places that no longer hold you, and walking toward a life that does. That day at the lake, I took my first real step. After I left the lake that day, I realized something important. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by love, by the people who choose you without expecting anything in return. I didn't find that love in grand gestures. I found it in the small, steady moments. Like Ivy, my attorney, who had quietly stood by me through every storm. She never once asked for anything beyond my trust. When I told her about cutting off my family, she didn't judge me. She simply said, "I'm proud of you. You did what you had to do." Those 6 words meant more to me than all the hollow compliments I had ever received from my parents. Or my assistant, Jenna, a young woman just starting her career. One evening, after a long day, she brought me a cup of tea and said, "You always look out for everyone else. Don't forget to look out for yourself too." Her words caught me off guard. I had grown so used to being invisible that kindness felt foreign, but it reminded me that love doesn't always come from where you expect. It comes from people who see you, really see you, without condition. There was also Mrs. Turner, my elderly neighbor who lived alone in the apartment down the hall. She had a habit of leaving fresh muffins at my door with little notes. "Thought you could use a treat today." We didn't share blood, but in her quiet gestures I felt more cared for than I ever had sitting at my parents' dinner table. The more I opened my eyes to these moments, the more I realized how starved I had been for true connection. My family had taught me that love was something to be earned, bargained for, paid through sacrifice. But these people, friends, colleagues, even neighbors, taught me that real love asks for nothing except authenticity. One evening, I invited a few close friends over to my apartment. We sat around the table eating takeout, laughing until our sides ached. At some point, I leaned back watching them and felt something I hadn't felt in years: belonging. No one there needed me to pay a bill, solve a crisis, or sacrifice my happiness. They just wanted me. I realized then that family can be chosen, and sometimes the families we choose give us more than the ones we're born into. I know many of you watching have walked this same path, learning to find love outside of the places where it should have been but never was. It's not easy. It hurts to accept that the people you expected to love you unconditionally never truly did. But when you finally see love in its real form, quiet, steady, unconditional, it changes everything. That night, as I walked my guests to the door and closed it behind them, I stood in the middle of my apartment and whispered to myself, "This is what it feels like. This is love." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly I learned the art of boundaries. For most of my life, the word no had been foreign to me. Every time my phone rang, I answered. Every time a crisis appeared, I fixed it. I believed love was measured by how much of myself I could give away, but after everything that happened, I knew I couldn't keep living like that. The first real test came when my father called out of the blue. His voice was sharp, commanding, as if nothing had changed. "Your mother needs help with some hospital bills. We'll send you the paperwork." For a moment, the old instinct kicked in. I almost reached for my checkbook. But then, I caught myself. My heart pounded as I said the words I had never said to him before. "No." The silence on the line was long, heavy. Finally, he barked, "What do you mean, no? We're your parents. It's your responsibility." I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "It's not my responsibility anymore. You chose to make me a stranger. Strangers don't pay your bills." The line went dead. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt free. Kieran tried next. His wedding plans had fallen apart without my money, and his anger was palpable. "You've destroyed this family," he hissed one afternoon when he showed up at my office. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply stood, looked him in the eye, and said, "No, Kieran. I didn't destroy this family. I just stopped letting you destroy me." Then I called security and had him escorted out. Setting those boundaries didn't erase the pain, but it gave me something more important than peace. It gave me dignity. For the first time in years, I wasn't defined by what I could provide. I was defined by what I chose to allow. I know many of you watching understand this shift. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're doors that you control, doors that open only to those who bring respect and love. In the weeks that followed, I built new habits. I stopped answering calls that came with chaos attached. I stopped explaining myself to people who had no interest in listening. I stopped giving pieces of myself away just to be tolerated. Instead, I started saying yes to me. Yes to rest. Yes to joy. Yes to love that didn't demand sacrifice as proof. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset bleed into the horizon, I realized something profound. My family's rejection had been brutal, but it had also given me a gift. By casting me out, they forced me to finally claim my own life. And I wasn't giving it back. Starting over wasn't dramatic. There was no fireworks, no sudden rush of joy. It came quietly, like the way dawn creeps over the horizon before you even realize the night is gone. I began with small things. I changed my phone number. I opened a new bank account, one that didn't have decades of invisible strings attached to it. I moved into a new apartment, smaller, but filled only with things that were mine. For the first time, every corner of my life felt like it belonged to me. Mornings became my favorite part of the day. I'd brew a fresh pot of coffee, open the window, and let the sunlight pour in. There were no frantic calls, no obligations pulling me in 10 directions. Just me, the quiet hum of the city, and the space to finally breathe. I started walking in the evenings, exploring neighborhoods I had never taken the time to see. I'd pass families laughing on their porches, couples walking hand in hand, children riding bikes until the streetlights flickered on. It didn't make me feel jealous anymore. It made me feel alive. Like maybe I was finally part of the world instead of standing on the sidelines. Sometimes I caught myself smiling for no reason. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. But because I was free. Free from the endless demands. Free from the constant judgment. Free from the heavy weight of trying to earn a love that was never mine to begin with. I know many of you watching have felt this too. That quiet, almost startling peace that comes when you finally let go of what was hurting you. It doesn't erase the past, but it gives you a future. And that future, I was beginning to see, was wide open. When I look back now, I don't see weakness in the years I spent carrying my family. I see a woman who loved too deeply, who gave everything she had because she believed that love would one day be enough. That woman deserved compassion, not shame. But I also see the moment everything changed. The night my parents called me a stranger, the day I finally said no. The silence I chose instead of begging for scraps of affection. Those moments broke me, but they also rebuilt me. Freedom doesn't always arrive in a blaze of glory. Sometimes it comes in the form of boundaries, in the quiet courage to walk away from what doesn't love you back. I thought losing my family would leave me empty. Instead, it left me whole. I no longer measure my worth by how much I give away. I no longer confuse sacrifice with love. I no longer beg to be chosen by people who never wanted to see me. Instead, I measure my life by the things that bring peace. By mornings filled with sunlight and coffee. By friendships built on laughter, not obligation. By love that feels like a gift, not a transaction. I know many of you watching have stood where I stood, at the crossroads of loyalty and self-preservation. Choosing yourself feels terrifying. It feels selfish. But here's the truth I had to learn. It's not selfish to protect your heart. It's survival. My journey hasn't been easy, but it has been worth it. Because now when I look in the mirror, I don't see a provider or a fixer or a shadow. I see Mara Collins, a woman who finally belongs to herself. The last time I saw the lake house, I didn't feel anger anymore. I stood on the gravel road, watching the water glisten in the sunlight, and I knew I was finally ready to let it go. That place had given me memories, but it had also chained me to pain. Walking away wasn't weakness, it was freedom. As the train carried me toward a new city, I pressed my forehead against the glass and watched the landscape roll by. For once, my heart felt light. I wasn't running from the past, I was choosing the future. And in that moment, I understood something I wish I had known years ago. Family is not defined by blood. Family is defined by love, by respect, by the people who stand beside you without asking for pieces of your soul in return. If you've been carrying the weight of a toxic family, if you've been told you're ungrateful or selfish for wanting peace, hear me when I say this, you are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to walk away. And when you do, you'll discover that freedom feels a lot like love. That's my story. And now, I want to hear yours. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family? Have you ever walked away to protect your peace? Share your experience in the comments. I promise you, you're not alone. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear these words today. Because sometimes, the greatest gift we can give each other is the reminder that we are stronger than the ties that try to break us. Remember this. Freedom isn't found in holding tighter to the past. Freedom is found in the courage to let go.